Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on India's national television channel, Doordarshan, about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations, and India's ties with important countries that are crucial for our rise. Viewers, in this episode, we are doing a deep dive into arguably the most defining strategic partnership that India has. This is with the United States. The U.S. India Comprehensive Global Strategic Partnership has had strong foundations for the last 2 decades, but is currently undergoing some strains and drift. How can we sustain, advance, and take this special partnership to a higher level? That is the theme of the show. And to discuss this, I have with me a very honored guest who is joining me in the studio, Richard Fontaine. Richard Fontaine is CEO of the Center for New American Security, an important think tank in Washington, D.C. He has served in the U.S. State Department, in the U.S. National Security Council, and in the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and is a widely regarded expert on global issues. Richard, welcome to Indian Diplomacy.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be with you.
Richard, defining partnership, but under some cloud. And some people are saying, that maybe the United States has lost India, quote unquote. There has been some lament that things are going adrift, especially with the economic tensions. And on the other side of the ledger, you have, some sense of a rapprochement or thaw between the US and China. And there is the talk about, G2 between China and the United States, where they could maybe divide the world into 2 spheres of influence and live happily ever after. President Donald Trump has said he's looking forward to everlasting peace and success with China. So really the question for all of us here, and we'd like to know from an American expert like you, is there some kind of fundamental reorientation or realignment that is happening in US foreign policy? And are the tables being inverted, where earlier India and the United States were supposed to be coming together to counterbalance China, but could it be that China and the United States patch up and therefore India's relevance for the US is lost now? Or you would like to know what you're thinking on, is this just a momentary, rhetorical spurt of, activity, or something deeper happening?
It's a momentary rhetorical spurt, but it's pretty significant nevertheless, because I think there will be some lasting effects from this. If you step back and look at the US-India relationship, it's been one of the great success stories from US foreign policy perspective over the past nearly 25 years, from a long period of estrangement during the Cold War, and then around the year 2000 or so, all the way through earlier this year, multiple presidencies of different parties, and of course, multiple governments of different parties in India have together forged an ever closer relationship on economics, defense, technology, diplomacy, all kinds of different things. This has been highly productive for both the United States and, I believe, for India. Part of the glue that has started to kind of push the US and India together, not all of it, but part of the glue has been a shared concern about China and the belief that both sides were better off dealing with the China challenge closer together than they would be otherwise. That's not changing. That said, I think President Trump both had a particular personal reaction after he believes he solved or didn't get sufficient credit for solving the war that took place between India and Pakistan earlier this year. And the other is he does really look at the China challenge mostly through an economic lens right now, and wants to get a trade deal. And so much of what you are seeing has to do with him trying to set the table to get a trade deal with China.
Right. Richard, so yes, I suppose maybe this is a phase, and we should get back on track on all aspects of this relationship. Viewers, you'll be interested in knowing that US-India partnership is so deep and so broad, like Richard is saying, built over 25 years. We have more than 50 formal dialogue mechanisms, 50. And with no other country do we have so much happening. And so in that sense, it's a major relationship that has to be preserved and taken forward. Richard, I'm also seeing some contradictions in terms of, on one hand, you have the economic confrontation over trade and tariffs, with India, we are facing 50% tariffs from the US for a few months. Exports have fallen by approximately 37% in the last several months. But on the other hand, we have just announced a 10-year framework for the major defense partnership between the defense secretary and the defense ministers. So what is this duality? I mean, on one hand, it looks like it's cold economics, but on geopolitics and security, it's still quite hot, US India, and we seem to be making strides. So your thoughts on the security aspect, which you closely track, and why is it that we are not seeing any collapse or shakiness there, but on the other hand, with the economics, it's seems to be wobbly?
President Trump seems to think that he can have a somewhat confrontational economic relationship, not only with India, with most countries in the world right now, and still have deep security cooperation that still deepens over time. And so you see this, again, not just between the United States and India, but the United States and Japan. So the United States put significant tariffs on Japanese exports to the United States. At the same time, it's taking steps to operationalize the U.S.-Japan alliance. There's tariffs on our closest allies in the world, like Australia and the United Kingdom. Again, while we're trying to deepen security partnerships, it's not clear to me that both of those things can hold indefinitely, because of course, if you do take steps on tariffs, as the United States has done, it has the inevitable effect of harming an economy, our own, of course, but also the one on whom you're putting the tariffs. And that has domestic political effects. It also affects the tone of the relationship. I mean, it is very strange to look around the world and say which countries in the world would be hit with the highest tariffs. You might think, okay, maybe North Korea or Iran or something. No, it's India and Brazil. That doesn't make a lot of sense from a partnership point of view, but that's where we are today.
Right. So I suppose somewhere the two have to align, the security and the economic aspects, and maybe that's the reason for us to believe that we'll get back on track. And you already mentioned the allies, US allies in the region, Richard. There's one more confusing or confounding aspect that we are observing, which is bilaterally, the US seems to be actually deepening security cooperation with, you mentioned Japan, you mentioned Australia, South Korea. They've announced nuclear-powered submarines, not only for Australia, but also for South Korea. So all these seem like, very much on track to, maintain the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific, right? And to shore up the alliance system. But on the other hand, we have the bigger, regional formation, which is the Quad. And on that count, we haven't had a Quad summit, which has been delayed. And there are doubts. Some people have even written the obituary for the Quad and are saying that, it's dead and there's just no Indo-Pacific vision. It's just one-on-one bilateral transactional deals. So your thoughts on, are we seeing the minilateralism and the plurilateralism which the US was doing well? And in fact, as you know, Quad was relaunched under the Trump first administration itself. Are we seeing any kind of a discarding of that and rebuilding of regional architecture and rather focusing just on individual countries and one-on-one? Or do you think ultimately, the sum is greater than the parts, and if you add up everything, it's still ultimately advancing the Indo-Pacific vision?
Yeah, the sum is still greater than parts, and the Quad definitely is not dead. I think the reason why the Quad summit isn't happening is because of the bilateral tensions between the United States and India and the fact that the Quad meeting is supposed to take place in India. And so if the summit were going to take place, then there would be big questions, of course, about bilateral U.S.-India trade relations, which are not in a good place. And then this spat that has happened and the president's own personal pique about credit for ending the war between India and Pakistan. Those are not very good reasons to not have a Quad summit. I wish we were having a Quad summit, but I think we'll get through this. And if you look, it wasn't only the Trump administration in his first term that revived the Quad, which then, of course, was picked up and augmented by the Biden administration and brought to another level. But even on his very first day in office, Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with the Quad foreign ministers who were in Washington for the U.S. Inauguration, which was a signal, again, I think, of how the current administration, generally speaking, values the Quad and sees that as a vehicle for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. Again, it's just unfortunate that all of this right now seems to be prisoner to this bilateral set of tensions between the United States and India. If we can get to a trade agreement and then hopefully back off some of these other rhetorical tensions, especially from the American side, then I think we'll be in a better place, not only bilaterally, but also in terms of some of these plurilateral, quadrilateral kind of frameworks.
Right. And, in fact, Richard, the U.S. Defense Secretary or Secretary of War, as is being called these days, has been saying wherever he has gone in the Indo-Pacific, that we will continue to support our partners and allies and provide deterrence against China. So on one hand, there is a G2 talk, but on the other hand, they are clearly indicating that when it comes to territorial expansionism and aggression of China, there's no backing away from that, and we will have to take the bull by the horns. So your thoughts on this particular aspect with India also, although we are not a formal ally, and now that the framework agreement has been signed, what is it that we can, take forward in this realm, especially in the maritime sphere where, we have converging interests?
I wouldn't put anything into this talk of a G2. The notion of a G2 started to come up during the Obama administration. I suspect that President Trump has only heard it for the first time very recently and started to use it. And he's used it in the context of his personal meeting with Xi Jinping. He likes to engage in flattery and kind of big talk ahead and right after meetings to talk about how amazing things are and how things will be settled and all this other stuff. There's a couple of problems with the G2. One, it doesn't exist, so there is no G2. There's a G7, there's G other things like that, but there is no G2 and there won't be a G2. The other is that the United States and China have such differing interests and worldviews and approaches to the Indo-Pacific. Our own worldviews and approaches to the Indo-Pacific are much more in harmony with countries like India, with the other Quad countries, with key treaty allies. And one of the things that sort of binds together that group of countries is a shared skepticism about Chinese intention and increasing Chinese power. And so the idea that the American president, the Chinese president are going to somehow get together and sort out all the world's problems and all the other countries will just be on the receiving end of those decisions is completely unrealistic. That will not happen. And I think the Secretary of Defense, or War, as you might call him these days, is more kind of representing the continuity in the U.S. approach, which is one that still seeks to balance Chinese power in the Indo-Pacific and to do so in combination with our friends and allies.
Right. I mean, talking of competition with China, Richard, the two domains in particular which have become like emerging focus areas, one is technology, advanced technology, and the other is critical minerals. Yeah. And on both these counts, the US has recently announced critical minerals agreements with Australia and with Japan. And with India also, we are working with a lot of US companies on semiconductors, on artificial intelligence. Google has announced a $15 billion investment recently in India to build an AI hub here. So those are the, steady issues. I mean, apart from the headline making ones, looks like the underlying issue where, technology and access to minerals seem to be driving the economic growth agendas of both countries also. So your thoughts on these two areas in particular, and what we are doing and what is the potential to do more with the US and with its broader alliance system in the region?
Well, on critical minerals, this has been something of a growing preoccupation in Washington and in its bilateral relationships with a number of countries going back at least a couple of years. And so you saw between the United States and India, there was an agreement on critical minerals during the end of the last administration. So last year, toward the end of the Biden administration, the Trump administration has come out even more kind of aggressively and striking specific critical mineral agreements, as you mentioned, with different countries. China's announcement not too long ago that it was effectively putting export controls on the export of critical minerals to the entire world that either had Chinese critical minerals, either Chinese sourcing or Chinese processing. This was a really huge wake-up call certainly for Washington, but for many countries, about just how dependent the world has become on choke point critical mineral, either production or supplies from China. And if that can be used in a coercive fashion, then it's something we wish to diversify away from. This is where India and the U.S. India relationship can be absolutely critical. The same thing is true on the technology side. I mean, India, of course, is a software powerhouse. It's overall an IT and technology powerhouse. The number of skilled engineers here, the investments that are happening, including from U.S. companies into building data centers or other infrastructure, AI architectures and others. All of this means that the United States and India are absolutely natural partners, both at a government level, but also at a business-to-business level on the technology side. And by doing more, both on technology and on critical minerals, that will help both of our countries in what ultimately is a competition with China that manifests itself largely outside the military sphere, so in the spheres of economics and technology.
Right, and trust factor, we've been talking about that and how technology is closely interlinked with trust, and that we should limit the sharing of technology also, just because it has strategic and national security implications. So going forward, how we build this circle of trust seems like a very, very fundamental issue for the bilateral as well as a broader context. Richard, you have been observing U.S.-India ties for a long time, and there are many mechanisms, as I mentioned, where we are making progress in spite of the ruffled feathers over trade. And what is fascinating is that there is still a degree of skepticism or criticism on both sides towards each other. And maybe as robust democracies, all kinds of viewpoints exist, so some of it is natural. But from the Washington D.C. point of view, you have seen the rhetoric rising, and some people in India even going to the extent of saying that the U.S. is like our number one adversary or our enemy and all that. So how can we calm that down? You already mentioned the defense secretary, even the secretary of state, Marco Rubio, has been very positive about India throughout this storm of the last several months. So how can we do the right kind of public signaling and messaging, you think, to make sure that the goodwill and the trust and a sense of dependability and reliability does not go away, for both sides? And, there will be some points on which we will always differ. But your thoughts on this aspect, which is more about sentiments and emotions and feelings, not so much about the fundamentals, which of course we agree remain strong.
Yeah, but I think that's part of the answer to what we need to do now. I mean, one is to step back and look at why this relationship has become ever closer over the past 25 years, despite ups and downs on any given year at any particular time over that course of that time. And that's because we have shared interests and shared values in some very important ways. Both India and the United States are big, fractious, noisy democracies that prize their own domestic political systems and believe that they're superior to autocracies and other forms of organization. Both the United States and India believe in a free and open Indo-Pacific where there's not some kind of hierarchical rule under the domination of one country that seeks to impose its will on the Western Pacific or on the Indian Ocean or anything else. Both the United States and India believe that they should live in a world generally governed by rules, and that countries can enjoy their independence and their sovereignty. And that means that there are countries out there, including China and others, that have a different view of the way things should be. That's the big picture, and the United States and India should be and have been working together to try to bring about the world that is conducive to their own interests and values. Now, that said, I do worry that it is a lot of emotion and personality involved in the current spat, but emotion and personality matters in international affairs. And also, Indian policymakers tend to have longer memories than American policymakers. And so I think we could get a trade deal relatively soon. I think that the rhetoric on India may shift relatively soon. And then the American side may say, okay, it's all done. Nothing to worry about here. But of course, Indian policymakers still remember 1998 with the American sanctions on India after the nuclear tests, or even 1971 when the U.S. sent a naval detachment to the Bay of Bengal during the war that led to the independence of Bangladesh. And Americans say, did we do that?
That was another generation.
Wait.
That was Nixon.
Exactly. I mean, you got to remind me that we did that. So we kind of always want to move on to the next thing and say, oh yeah, that was in the past. Let's just look forward. But you talked about trust, and trust is built slowly and carefully over a long period of time of shared, cooperation and behavior. And that can be undermined rather quickly. And I worry that trust will take a lot longer to rebuild than it will take even to sort of change some of these policies.
Yeah. One has to work on this. This is constant gardening kind of a job. Last word, Richard. We have 5 million plus Indian diaspora now in the US. And, they are major assets, and many of them are holding high offices and are influencing policy making. This has always been seen as a major cementing factor, or a living bridge, as we say, between the US and India. What role do you foresee for the diaspora, our diaspora there? And conversely, we are trying to get more Americans to come here to study in India and to be here, for longer durations, maybe even work in India. That aspect, how could we leverage that going forward to make sure that this remains, a secular success story, this relationship?
Yeah, I think the diaspora has become an increasingly important political force, of course, economic force as well in the United States. But I also think it's wrong to think that 5 million Indian Americans all think alike any more than 5 million Indians would think alike, or 5 million Americans of any kind would think alike. So they do tend to have different views on different things, but nevertheless, generally speaking, strong people-to-people ties and strong enthusiasm for a closer U.S.-India relationship. And I think that is some of the ballast that is in the bilateral relationship that can help to propel this forward. I think you're absolutely right on the need for Americans to spend more time in India, understanding India, studying in India. If you look over the past 20 years or so, the number of young Americans, for example, that have taken on the challenge of understanding China, learning Chinese, studying in China or in Taiwan or in Hong Kong or somewhere else. I mean, it's really been transformational in a lot of ways. We have not yet seen that on India, and yet India is such an important country and such a close partner of the United States, despite the current troubles, that I think, and we have so many Indian students studying in the United States, you just don't see the reverse in anything like the same numbers. And so I think that, increasing those ties, particularly at the educational level and among younger Americans who can understand what India is all about, understand the nature of the country and the nature of the relationship, I think that would be good for America if we can do that.
Yeah. And think tanks, Richard, last word. Think tanks, we have strategic community here, strategic community there. Sometimes we are at odds with each other in terms of our reasoning because we come from respective national interests. But overall, I think the bipartisan consensus on both sides, in strategic elites, is that this relationship must be sustained no matter what, isn't it?
I think that's it. That's exactly right. I mean, India has a very vibrant strategic community. The United States does too. That's not always true of every country in the world. And there are, of course, many views in many quarters in both places. But I think largely speaking, the consensus is that a closer, sustained U.S.-India relationship is in the interests of both of our countries. And we have values that we share that are critical as well. And so the question in times of trouble, like the ones we've had in the past few months, the question is, how do we move out of this and get back on track rather than, is this the end? This is not the end. Hopefully this is the beginning of the end of the current troubles, and then we move on to getting back to the kind of vibrancy that we saw not too long ago.
Right, viewers, fascinating conversation with Richard Fontaine of the Center for New American Security. And I think the crux of what he's been saying is captured in this, evocative question, how do we get out of here and move forward? And that's really the key. It's a mature strategic partnership we have developed with the United States over a long time. There have been ups and downs in the past. Writing an obituary and saying that, it's all over and that this is the lowest point that we have hit in 25 years probably is an exaggeration, because as we've spoken, there are many areas and issue areas in which we are continuing to forge ahead. It may not be making the headlines, but the two sides are working close. But we also spoke about other stakeholders in the system, including the strategic community, the diaspora, the corporate houses on both sides. All these have to now really come out in unison to make sure that we don't lose the gains of 25 years just like that. It's the fundamentals remain strong, the structural alignment remains, and United States remains one of the central pillars on the basis of India's multi-alignment strategy. We may align with a few others, but certainly not with China. And therefore, the US relationship is going to be very, very critical going forward as we expand our own influence and want to become a great power ourselves. Let me thank Richard Fontaine for important work that you've been doing, your think tank has been doing, and we hope that we further these discussions in the form of concrete policies going forward.
Thank you very much for having me. Good to talk to you.
Viewers, the US-India Comprehensive Global Strategic Partnership is not going away. Both sides are working assiduously to iron out the creases and to make sure that the positivity comes back in all dimensions. There could be occasional pillars on which we are disagreeing, but overall, the point is that this is an indispensable partnership for both sides. And sometimes people quibble over, does the US need India more or does India need the US more? I think the answer lies somewhere in between. And we need each other, and that is the reality. And therefore, we need to work hard with a great deal of sensitivity to each other's concerns to make sure that even those emotions are kept under check, because that is how we can take the relationship to greater heights. So let's cheer for US-India friendship, which is a rarity these days, but I think it will come back. Better days are coming, and we need to all work towards that outcome. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.